welcome to Jay Coletti's Racket Reviews. My name is Jay Coletti and I will be your hostess. Here on this channel we are dedicated to learning about all things organized crime, and I'm very excited to continue the mini-series today discussing the major crime families in the United States by wrapping up our discussion about the Genovese family, New York's oldest crime family. We have a lot to cover today, so if you haven't seen part 1, make sure to go watch that episode now so you can catch up on where we are and how we got here, but let's get rolling. Just to quickly get you back up to speed, Lucky Luciano became boss following the Castellammarese War from 1929 to 1931. The Castellammarese War left Lucky Luciano as the only boss standing in the Genovese family. None of the other founders or former dons would live to see past this mob war. Nicholas and Vincenzo Terranova had been murdered before the Castellammarese War in 1916 and 1922 respectively. Salvatore Maranzano, the head of the now Bonanno family and chief rival of the Genovese boss Joe Mazzaria, ordered the killing of Giuseppe Morello, the founder of the now Genovese family, on August 15, 1930. Morello was shot dead while collecting payment from one of the Morello retailers in East Harlem. Morello and one of Mazzaria's associates were shot by 2 assassins. Witnesses say Morello knew that it was a hit and tried to escape, but there was nowhere to run. Luciano, who had changed alignments and was working with Maranzano at this point, engineered the death of Joe Mazzaria on April 15, 1931, and then double-crossed Maranzano, having him killed on September 10, 1931. Lucky Luciano was the boss of the Genovese family from 1931 to 1946, and his leadership completely changed the way that mafia families were run and would be run in the future. The Castellammarese War was a war of ideologies. The debate over whether or not non-Sicilians could be made men in the Cosa Nostra, and later, the battle to become the boss of bosses. When Luciano took control in 1931, he established the commission and abolished the title of boss of bosses. This would make Lucky Luciano the first official boss of the Genovese family. The commission operated as a national organized crime network, with the heads of the mafia families as senators for Cosa Nostra's overall operations, and Lucky Luciano was the godfather of this governing body. The early to mid-1930s was when Lucky Luciano was really living the high life. He had more money than he knew what to do with thanks to Prohibition. He was the new leader of his family, and he had just established the commission. His power was enormous. Living under the name Charles Ross at Waldorf Towers, he had everything. Expensive clothes, expensive cars, chauffeurs, women, plenty of women. He was a notorious philanderer. The man caught 2 cases of syphilis and 7 cases of gonorrhea in his lifetime. Beginning in the 1930s, Luciano's family had begun working in the prostitution business, and by 1936 was one of the main ways that Luciano's gang made their money, along with extortion. He was convicted of both in 1936 and was sentenced to 30 to 50 years behind bars. That didn't stop him. Lucky Luciano continued to run the family behind bars for several years. He established Vito Genovese as acting boss in 1936. This position only lasted 1 year for Genovese. Vito Genovese was a longtime friend of Lucky Luciano and helped him during the Castellammarese War. He would also be crucial in helping Luciano expand the heroin trade internationally. In 1937, Genovese fled to Italy for fear of facing murder charges and supported Benito Mussolini's regime to avoid being deported back to the United States. Genovese would not return to the United States until 1945. In 1937, after Genovese had fled, Luciano established Frank Costello as his acting boss. So I think it's fair to say, given all of Luciano's life, that he knew how to wiggle into a good deal. And so this is when we see Lucky Luciano really flex his muscles and start working with the US Navy during World War II. While serving his time in the early 1940s, Luciano was contracted by the US Navy to gather information on any Mussolini spies in the US, typically suspected to be Italian-American dock workers and fishermen. As the docks were mafia-owned, it was even more challenging to get any of these men to talk, as they were all sworn to omerta, or the code of silence. Lucky Luciano agreed to cooperate fully with the Navy to gather intelligence and guarantee that there would be no dock worker strikes throughout the war, and in exchange, the state of New York agreed to commute Luciano's sentence. Luciano kept his promise, and there were no dock worker strikes throughout the war after Luciano had agreed to this deal. Once the war had ended, Luciano petitioned the state of New York for executive clemency, citing his service to the Navy. The Navy, embarrassed to have worked with a mobster, refused to confirm Luciano's claim. Lucky for Luciano, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office sidestepped the Navy's lack of confirmation, and the State Parole Board agreed unanimously to recommend Luciano's release so long as he was deported to Italy. On January 4th, 1946, 1946, Luciano's sentence was commuted, and on February 9th, 1946, Luciano was deported to Italy and settled in Rome. He didn't stay there for very long. In 1947, he traveled to Cuba to meet with fellow syndicate heads to collect cash gifts and discuss expanding the drug trade. Cuba's government was very quickly pressured to deport Luciano back to Italy, and in that same year, deported him. He would remain in Naples under close surveillance. He continued to direct the U.S. drug trade, smuggling, and illegal immigration. During this time, he had also been corresponding with the film producer Martin Gauche, talking about making a movie about his life and sharing details about his journey. More on this in a little bit. So Frank Costello becomes the boss of the Genovese family in 1946 and remains boss until 1957. Lucky Luciano's ability to run the family from afar had waned, and in 1946 he handed the reins to Frank Costello. Frank Costello was a very successful and popular Don. His reign was smooth. Until it wasn't. During Costello's time as boss, the family made a lot of money with gambling in New Orleans, Florida, Cuba, and Los Angeles. He grew the family's political influence. He was the most politically influential mobster in the country, but he was extremely popular with his own men due to his strong sense of equity. He shared the profits from the family's operations and did not demand a large cut of the earnings from the men below him. Frank Costello was actually one of the inspirations for Vito Corleone in The Godfather, if that gives you any indication of his managerial style and how popular he was, even down to the attempt on his life. In 1957, an attempt was made on Frank Costello's life by Vincent Gigante, much more on him later in this episode, on orders from Vito Genovese on May 2nd, 1957. While Frank Costello did not die from his injuries, this did persuade him to pass the torch to Vito Genovese. In 1958, Costello was called to testify on the attempted assassination, where he said he was unable to recognize Vincent Gigante as the assailant. Gigante was acquitted for attempted murder. Frank Costello retired and was known as the Prime Minister of the Underworld, acting as an advisor and friend for several of his previous associates, including Carlo Gambino, Meyer Lansky, and Thomas Lucchese. In February 1973, Costello suffered a heart attack and died in the hospital on February 18th, 1973. After Vito Genovese's successful takeover, he was boss from 1957 to 1969. Vito Genovese and Carlo Gambino had worked together to establish Vito Genovese as head of the now Genovese family, and Carlo Gambino is head of the now Gambino family. As you can see by their families' names, their plan was successful, with Frank Costello transferring power to Vito Genovese and Carlo Gambino taking over after the successful murder of Albert Anastasia. The two men had moved into their positions as bosses. Once again, that craving to have the role of bosses proved to be detrimental. Genovese wanted that title, and on November 14, 1957, held a summit for mafia leaders in Joe Barbara of the Northeastern Pennsylvania crime family's home in Appalachian, New York, the same location where the summit was held the year before and where Carmine Galante of the Bonanno family had been stopped and questioned by state troopers. The home was from then on watched by surveillance teams. When the vehicles of several top-ranking mobsters pulled into the home on November 14, 1957, the state troopers were able to move in. 50 of the men escaped, 58 were arrested, including Vito Genovese. All of the men who were arrested claimed that they were visiting Joe Barbara because he wasn't feeling well. Genovese was indicted for narcotic trafficking and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Before he went to prison, Genovese had established a ruling panel of his highly ranked men to manage the family's activities while he was boss from prison. Let's go through Genovese's rule and his acting bosses. Anthony Strollo was acting boss for Vito Genovese from 1959 to 1962. Strollo had helped Genovese in his plot to seize power from Costello. He was one of Genovese's highest-ranking members. In 1959, Strollo had joined up with Carlo Gambino to double-cross Genovese and get him the 15-year prison sentence that he was then serving. On April 8, 1962, Strollo disappeared. His remains have never been found, and later Genovese hinted that he might have had something to do with Strollo's murder, but even today, there is no concrete evidence. As a quick note, I wanted to give you some closure on Lucky Luciano and his timeline. Like I said, I will be covering Lucky Luciano in his own video, but just for the sake of closure for now, let's get into what happened to Lucky Luciano. On January 26, 1962, Luciano agreed to meet film and television producer Martin Gauche at the Naples airport to iron out the details. Luciano did not know, but Italian drug agents followed him to the airport to arrest him on drug smuggling charges. The agents never got their man, and Luciano never got his movie. Charles Lucky Luciano died of a heart attack at the Naples International Airport on January 26, 1962. Lucky Luciano's body would be returned to the United States and buried at St. John's Cemetery in Middle Village, Queens. His friend Carlo Gambino gave his eulogy. Let's get back to Genovese's leadership behind bars and his acting bosses in the meantime. From 1962 to 1965, Thomas Eboli was Genovese's acting boss. Eboli was problematic. He had borrowed $4 million from the Commission and Gambino family head Carlo Gambino to begin a new drug trafficking organization. He was promptly arrested, and his operation was shut down by law enforcement. Gambino later ordered Eboli's killing as he was unable to pay up, although allegedly this had less to do about the payment and more to do with Gambino putting in his man Alphonse Thierry in Eboli's place. No one has ever been charged with Thomas Eboli's July 16, 1972 murder. Now we're on to Philip Lombardo. Philip Lombardo was acting boss from 1965 until Vito Genovese's death on Valentine's Day, 1969. After Genovese's death, Lombardo took over as the official boss. He was in poor health himself and used decoy or front bosses, including Thomas Eboli, making it clear that it was his intention to establish Vincent Gigante as the next boss. After Eboli's murder in 1972, the man who took his place as front boss was Alphonse Thierry, Gambino's guy. In 1981, Thierry died, and Lombardo stepped down, citing poor health, and established Vincent Gigante in his place as the boss, with Anthony Fat Tony Salerno as Gigante's front boss. Vincent the Chin Gigante, the professional boxer turned mob enforcer who missed his shot in an attempt to kill the Don and ended up being the Don of that same family himself, then feigned mental illness by wandering around Greenwich Village in his bathrobe to stay off of the FBI's radar. Unreal. What makes it even crazier is that Gigante also ordered the failed assassination attempt of John Gotti in 1986, but since Gotti and so many of his associates were convicted, Gigante ended up being recognized as the most powerful crime boss in the US. Gigante was very anxious about getting caught by the FBI and had several front bosses in addition to his mental illness act. As mentioned before, Anthony Fat Tony Salerno was a trusted Genovese underboss and was Gigante's front boss until he was indicted on RICO charges in 1986. Liborio Bellomo was Gigante's front boss from 1990 to 1992, when Gigante had been convicted of extortion in 1990. Gigante showed up for his trial in his bathrobe, and his defense teams held that he was mentally unfit. He was indicted again in 1993 for sanctioning the murder of 6 mobsters. Following Bellomo, Dominic Cirillo was Gigante's acting boss from 1997 to 1998. He was the acting boss while Gigante was behind bars after the March 1996 sanity hearings. These are the hearings during which Sammy the Bull Gravano, former Gambino underboss turned FBI informant, testified that Gigante was putting on an act. Cirillo was acting boss until he stepped down due to a heart attack and went back to being a capo regime for the Genovese family instead. Following Cirillo, Matthew Ianiello was acting boss from 1998 to 2005, the remainder of Vincent Gigante's life behind bars. Ianiello made his money from the bus drivers union and the waste management industry. Vincent Gigante would die due to cardiovascular disease on December 19, 2005. He had many complications with his heart and even had an open heart surgery in 1988. Following Vincent Gigante's death in 2005, Liborio Bellomo stepped up as the Don from 2005 to current day. The only issue with this was that Bellomo was still behind bars from a RICO conviction in 1996. Bellomo established Daniel Leo as his acting boss in 2005. Leo was then indicted in 2007 and pled guilty in 2008 for loan sharking and racketeering. He then pled guilty for additional racketeering charges in 2010 and was released from federal custody in 2013. In 2006, Bellomo received another sentence on racketeering charges and the murder of Ralph Coppola, Bellomo's own captain and friend. Coppola had gone missing on September 16, 1998. He was believed to have been disrespectful to Bellomo. Some believe that he was even stealing from the family. Bellomo was indicted for the murder of Coppola and pled guilty to his role in the murder, but due to insufficient evidence and being unable to place a triggerman at the scene of the crime, Bellomo was offered a plea bargain for mail fraud instead. Bellomo was released from prison in 2008 after serving 12 years. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Racket Reviews, wrapping up the history of New York's oldest crime family, the Genovese family. There's so much that I had to skip just to get everything into a reasonable amount of time. I've had a lot of fun researching all of this for you, and I hope that you have had just as much fun learning about all of this. I will definitely be covering some of the other fun facts in the peripheral and in their own videos if need be. Make sure to like, subscribe, and click notifications to get more Mafia content sent directly to your sub box. Ciao!